They told you to love with all your heart, to be soft, to be patient, to give without keeping score, because if you're kind enough, the world won't hurt you. But Machiavelli never believed that. He didn't see love as salvation. He saw it as a crack in the armor, a blind spot in your strategy, an opening just wide enough for betrayal to slip through. Because when you lead with emotion, you put logic in the back seat, and anyone who understands that can weaponize the very love you thought would protect you. Machiavelli understood this. A man who depends on love will be destroyed by it. Not because love is evil, but because love doesn't calculate, and the world does. You love your family, your friends, your woman. You tell them everything. You forgive before you understand. You think, if I would never hurt them, they would never hurt me. That's not the voice of a man. That's the voice of a child. And Machiavelli, if he were alive today, would simply look at you and nod. Not out of judgment, but because he's been there, until he learned this one truth. The deepest wounds don't come from enemies. They come from the people you let closest. It's familiarity that dulls their respect. It's access that kills their gratitude. It's your unconditional patience that turns you into a tool, not always out of malice. Sometimes, it's just human nature. We exploit what's freely available. We take for granted what we never had to earn. And that's why you have to change. Becoming cold-blooded doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you love with structure, with standards, with strategy. You love like a man who holds the reins, not like a man begging to be loved back. Because love without boundaries isn't connection. It's exposure. If you've ever been taken advantage of for being too good, if you've been abandoned for being too loyal, if you've always been the one who apologizes first, who waits, who forgives, then it's time to tell yourself, from this moment forward, I no longer love the same way. And if what I just said lit something inside you, if a part of you has finally had enough of being the one who gets hurt for caring too deeply, then press like, not for me, but as a signal to yourself that the old version of you is done, and subscribe if you're ready to make that evolution permanent. Not because you need more content, but because you're building a new kind of man, the kind who protects his heart with a plan. This isn't just a video. This is a wake-up call Machiavelli issued centuries ago. In a world that profits from your softness, a man without strategy will be devoured by the very love he gives away too freely. She started small, a sigh that lingered longer than usual, a delayed reply, a look that used to say, I see you now, glazed over like fog on a mirror. But you didn't notice, because when you love someone deeply, you don't see them. You project on them. You paint over their silence with stories of hope. You forgive patterns you should have questioned, just to keep the fantasy intact. You don't want the truth. You want the comfort. And that's the first cost of love without strategy. It doesn't just blind you to betrayal. It blinds you to change. And Machiavelli understood this with terrifying clarity. He who builds his defense on love alone builds on sand. Because the moment you lead with love, you give the other person the power to rewrite the rules without ever informing you that the game has changed. You stopped calculating. You stopped defending your position. You stopped watching the board. And while you were busy being kind, they made moves. They learned your forgiveness is automatic. Your presence is guaranteed. Your patience, unlimited. So they pushed. They showed up late. They stopped saying thank you. They reacted with anger when you needed space. Not because they hated you, but because they knew they could. That's the Machiavellian principle. Familiarity doesn't breed love. It breeds entitlement. The more they access you without cost, the less they value what they've accessed, and over time, you don't become their blessing. You become their backup plan, not because they're cruel, but because you never made them earn your presence. And if that truth resonated with you, if these words helped you name something you've always felt but never said, consider leaving a super thanks below. It's your way of helping this team continue to produce content with the precision, power, and care it deserves. Thank you sincerely for standing with us. Ask yourself, when was the last time you stayed quiet to avoid an argument? The last time you said, "It's not worth it," when it absolutely was? When was the last time you apologized not because you were wrong, but because you didn't want to lose them? Now ask yourself, how many times did they return the favor? This isn't love. This is slow erosion. This is self-abandonment in a tuxedo. And that's what Machiavelli feared more than enemies: blind loyalty. Because betrayal doesn't need to break down your door. It just needs you to stop locking it. And love, unchecked, makes you throw away the key. That's why you need structure, boundaries, terms. Even in love, you need to be the kind of man who can look into the eyes of someone he adores and still say, "I will not let you harm me," and stay. Because unconditional love is poetic in books, but in real life, it turns kings into servants. Machiavelli never said to stop loving. He said to stop loving blindly. To stop handing swords to people just because they make you feel seen. To stop bleeding for anyone who flinches at the sight of your boundaries. Love is not a virtue when it has no discipline. It is not strength when it refuses to say no. So the next time someone tells you you're cold for setting a boundary, remember this: they are not mourning the loss of love. They are mourning the death of their control. And in that moment, you reclaim your power, not through anger, not through revenge, but through clarity. That is the Machiavellian way. To love like a man who sees clearly, not like a child who hopes blindly. You thought you were doing the right thing. That being open meant you were strong. That being patient meant you were wise. That being the first to forgive meant you were evolved. But here's what no one told you: you weren't leading. You were draining, not through blood, but in quiet, invisible ways. Like every time you silenced your voice to avoid the storm, like every time you walked into a room and left parts of yourself at the door, every compromise, every swallowed truth, every look away, Machiavelli would have seen it immediately. He would have said, emotion is the leash they use to drag your power behind their pleasure. Because what feels like virtue on the surface often becomes a slow erosion of self beneath. You walked into life holding your soul like a fragile object, whispering, "Please handle with care." But they didn't. Not because they were evil, but because they knew you'd come back. You'd explain. You'd make peace even when you didn't cause the war. You believed your silence was strength. But silence, without consequence, to become permission. And in a Machiavellian world, permission, unspoken, is strategy. They stopped respecting your retreat, stopped earning your presence, because they had already mapped your patterns. You forgive automatically. You stay instinctively. You give endlessly without asking if you're being given to. And once that pattern is clear, they stop valuing what you offer. They begin to collect it, like a resource they never had to earn. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you kept quiet to avoid an argument? The last time you apologized not because you were wrong, but because you feared they'd walk away? Now ask yourself, how often did they do the same for you? This isn't love. It's quiet disintegration. It's a slow unraveling dressed up as loyalty. And that's what Machiavelli feared more than enemies' devotion that can't see clearly. Because betrayal doesn't need to break your door down. It just needs you to stop locking it. And love, unchecked, makes you forget where the door even was. That's why you need structure, Boundaries. Terms. Even in love. You must become the kind of man who can look into the eyes of someone he adores and still say, "I will not let you harm me," and stay. Unconditional love sounds poetic in novels, but in real life, it turns leaders into laborers, kings into servants. Machiavelli never said stop loving. He said stop loving blindly. Stop placing swords in the hands of those who only made you feel seen. Stop bleeding for people who flinch the moment you draw a boundary. Love isn't virtue when it lacks discipline. It isn't strength when it refuses to say no. So the next time someone tells you you're cold for having limits, remember this. They aren't grieving your love. They're grieving the death of their control. And in that moment you reclaim your power. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through precision. That is the Machiavellian way. To love like a man who sees clearly, not like a child who hopes blindly. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't just wake up and hand over your power. It begins in moments so small, so quiet. You don't even realize the game has changed. You say yes to something you didn't want to do. You stay silent when your soul screamed to speak. You forgive before an apology ever arrived. And you tell yourself, "I'm just being the bigger person." But Machiavelli would call it what it is: unstrategic surrender. Because here's the truth. The moment you stop enforcing your boundaries, the game doesn't end. They just start winning. And not because they're stronger, not because they're smarter, but because they're the only ones still moving their pieces. You think you're avoiding conflict. You think you're keeping the peace. But silence, in this context, is not peace. It's a vacuum. And vacuums don't stay empty. They get filled by force. Your absence of resistance becomes their blueprint. They test your patience. Then they test your self-worth. And eventually, they rewrite the rules of the relationship without ever needing your permission. You used to speak up, used to walk away, used to draw the line. But now, you hesitate, you justify, you whisper things like, "Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe they didn't mean it like that. Maybe I just need to be more understanding." No, you don't need more understanding. You need your spine back, because time doesn't fix disrespect. It cements it. Every time you let it slide, you're laying bricks for the prison. They'll eventually trap you in. Machiavelli warned us, if your forgiveness is predictable, it will be used before it is appreciated. Let that burn into your bones, because that's what you've been taught. Right, that love keeps no record, that you shouldn't keep score. But tell me, what king survives without a ledger? What general wins wars without counting losses? You've allowed guilt to replace logic, emotion to override reason. And every time you choose comfort over clarity, you pay in quiet self-erasure. And they collect your time, your silence, your presence, without paying a cent of gratitude. Until one day, you finally say no. And suddenly you're the villain. You're cold. You've changed. Of course you have, because growth always offends the people who benefited from your stagnation. If this message spoke directly to your experience, and you believe more men deserve to hear truths like this, you can support the team with a super thanks below. Every gesture helps us raise the standard and deliver work that cuts deeper, hits harder, and tells the stories no one else dares to tell. And if you already have, thank you. Truly, they miss the version of you who made their life easier by making yours smaller. But Machiavelli understood this. He wrote, "The man who is feared for his firmness will be respected long after the kind man is forgotten." You don't need to be feared like a tyrant. You need to be respected like a man who means what he says. Consistency is power. And power is not something you negotiate. It's something you hold or you lose. So stop apologizing for the walls you built after years of being trampled. Those walls are not cruelty. They are clarity. They say, you can still knock, but you will not walk through without my permission. Because the second they stop fearing consequences, they stop filtering their behavior. And when there's no filter, there's no bottom. They will expect forgiveness without reform, loyalty without reciprocity, access without qualification. And when you finally pull back, they won't call it correction. They'll call it betrayal. But they're not mourning your love. They're mourning the loss of advantage, the free emotional labor, the convenient silence, the man who didn't know how to say no. But that man, he's gone. Now you don't beg. You don't chase. You don't explain. You return to the board, not with rage, but with rules. Let them talk. Let them whine. Let them say you've changed. Because you're not here to be emotionally available on demand. You're here to be in command of your emotional availability. The game never stopped. You just stepped away. Now, you pick up your pieces. You study the board. And you remind them, you were never the piece. You were always the player. They told you to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to not rock the boat, to smile through discomfort, to let things slide in the name of harmony. But they never told you the truth. Did they? They never told you what that peace would cost, what it would take from your spine, from your voice, from your soul. Because what they called peace was never peace. It was submission. It was the slow suffocation of your standards. It was your identity being chipped away one small silence at a time. And you thought you were strong for swallowing your truth. You thought you were kind for forgiving what kept cutting you. You thought you were noble for always being the one who moved on. But Machiavelli would shake his head. Not because you're weak, but because he understood what happens to a man who trades clarity for comfort. There is no peace where respect is absent, and no loyalty where fear is forgotten. You stayed quiet when they dismissed your needs. You forgave betrayal not because they changed, but because you couldn't bear the tension of holding your ground. You kept smiling while bleeding. And what did it earn you? A seat at a table where everyone eats from your plate. But no one ever asks if you're hungry. You became the nice one, the strong one, the one they can unload on, step on, and circle back to when it's convenient. And the moment, the exact moment, you say enough. They look at you with wide eyes and wounded egos. You've changed. You're so cold now. What happened to you? But let's be honest. You didn't change. You just stopped dying for their comfort. And if that makes them uncomfortable, let them sit in it. Let them sit in the tension they used to avoid by drowning you in guilt. Because the peace you were protecting was never yours. It was their comfort in your compliance, their ease in your erasure. They didn't love you. They loved the version of you who tolerated everything and asked for nothing. And now that version is gone. So yes, they'll call you distant. Yes, they'll call you harsh. Yes, they'll say, you're not who you used to be. Good. Because the man you used to be was dying behind a smile. You were burning inside just to keep them warm. And you thought that was virtue. You thought that was love. But what if love isn't always kind? What if real love draws a line and dares people not to cross it? What if strength isn't in how long you can endure, but in how clearly you can say, this is where it stops? That's not bitterness. That's boundaries. And boundaries are what separate men who are respected from men who are remembered only for their availability. So let me ask you something, and don't answer too quickly. How many times have you apologized for making someone else uncomfortable by finally honoring your truth? How many times have you lowered your tone, shrunk your truth, stepped back from confrontation because you were taught that peace is always preferable? And what did it buy you? Did they respect you more? Did they change? Did they appreciate the peace you broke yourself to protect? Or did they just keep taking and calling it normal? Because if the only way to keep peace is to go to war with yourself, that's not peace. That's performance. And like every performance, it has a breaking point. This is yours. So from this moment on, let your peace be expensive. Let your love be filtered. Let your silence be earned, not assumed. Because the people who truly care about you will lean into your clarity. They won't run from it. They won't weaponize your growth. They won't mourn the loss of the version of you that made their life easier while yours fell apart. Let them leave. Let them whisper. Let them say you've changed. Because you have. And you should be proud of that. From now on, you don't confuse stillness with safety. You don't confuse compliance with connection. You don't confuse patience with purpose. You are not here to be agreeable. You are here to be real. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself. So draw your lines. Speak your truth. Watch who gets uncomfortable when you stop shrinking. Because those who disappear were never in love with you. They were in love with their power over you. And now that power is gone, because this man, the one standing in your shoes now, is no longer afraid of conflict. He's not performing for approval. He's not holding the ship together while it sinks beneath his feet. He has drawn the line. And behind that line, there is peace. Real peace. Not silence. Not avoidance. Not suffering hidden behind a smile. But peace that costs nothing you weren't meant to give in the first place. They told you to love unconditionally, to keep showing up, to keep giving, to keep forgiving. But no one warned you that the people closest to you would start treating that love like air expected. Unmeasured. Free. And what's always accessible quickly becomes invisible. What's never protected inevitably gets abused. You weren't loving. You were leaking, pouring pieces of yourself into places that never planned to hold you. And Machiavelli, he saw it for what it is. He didn't tell men to stop loving. He told them to structure it, to surround it with architecture, to protect it with precision, because love without boundaries isn't love. It's exposure, and an exposed man is the easiest to bend, to twist, to drain. So let me ask you plainly, how many times have you apologized just to stop someone else's emotional meltdown? How many times have you shrunk yourself because their volume rose? How many times did you cave in because being called cold hurt more than being disrespected? That's not love. That's emotional pressure, repackaged as intimacy. That's manipulation draped in the language of closeness. You were constant, steady, reliable, always there. But when the weight shifted, when it was your turn to need, they delayed. They disappeared. They hesitated like your pain had a price tag. And when you finally said no, when you whispered that tiny rebellion, they panicked. Not because they cherished you, but because they lost their favorite tool, your emotional compliance. Machiavelli would have seen it instantly. When your loyalty is predictable, it will be exploited before it is appreciated. So what now? You sharpen the edge. You build the filter. You don't stop loving. You refine it. You love through standards. You love through structure. You love through clarity. Not to injure, but to define. To remind that this heart of yours is not a community resource. It's a vault, and only those with the code get to enter. Love that can't say no isn't noble. It's servitude. Your warmth must be invited, not assumed. Your time must be earned, not expected. Your loyalty is not default. It is a privilege. And when they test it, you don't argue. You don't explain. You observe. Watch what happens when you say, "This is where it ends." Do they honor that line? Or try to cross it louder? Because the ones who react to your limits aren't seeking love. They're seeking access. Control. The version of you who never questioned the weight he carried. That version, he's gone. He left quietly. Somewhere between the nights you waited for a text and the mornings you convinced yourself it meant nothing, he died the moment you realized your loyalty was costing you your sanity. You're not here to be infinite. You're not here to be absorbent. You're not here to be someone's emotional safety net while they gamble with your boundaries. You are here to build a threshold. Not a wall, but a gate. And not everyone makes it through. Because love without entry requirements becomes survival without recognition. This isn't cruelty. It's curation. And curation is clarity. And clarity is love for yourself finally. Firmly. Unapologetically. So when they call you distant, nod. When they say you've changed, agree. Because what they're really mourning isn't your affection. It's the version of you who never made them earn it. That version is gone. What remains is a man who still loves, but only through discernment. Not surrender. They told you to love without fear, to give without limits, to forgive without hesitation, to trust without question. They called that strength. They said that was what made a man good, admirable, worthy. But Machiavelli would have laughed, not because he hated love, but because he understood this. Fearless love isn't noble. It's naive. Because real strength, the kind that lasts, is never blind and never fearless. You've been sold a dream, a dangerous one, a doctrine wrapped in poetry and soaked in poison. Be soft. Always return. Never withhold your heart. And you obeyed. You said yes when you wanted to scream no. You stayed when you were already unraveling. You kept showing up even when your soul was limping. And they told you that's what love looks like. But here's what Machiavelli knew, and what they never told you. When a man loves without fear, he becomes easy to control. He becomes soft clay in hands that don't know how to hold him. He becomes obedient, pliable, predictable. And in a world ruled by perception, predictability is death. Let me ask you, how many times have you betrayed yourself just to be understood? How many times have you silenced your instincts just to keep someone else comfortable? How many times have you swallowed your standards because you were afraid of being called difficult, toxic, selfish? That's not love. That's emotional propaganda. A system designed to keep good men in cages built from their own guilt. Because when you love without fear, you forget to protect yourself. You give so much. You vanish. And when you disappear into your giving, they don't stop you. They applaud you. Until you're no longer a man, you're a resource. A function. A faucet they turn on when they're thirsty and turn off when they're full. And when you finally run dry, they don't grieve. They just refill elsewhere. Fearless love doesn't make you stronger. It makes you disposable. Machiavelli saw this across history. Kings who couldn't walk away got slaughtered. Generals who fought for loyalty without leverage got betrayed. Men who worshipped instead of ruled got erased. Because when you give your heart without guardrails, without standards, without consequence, you are not offering love. You are offering power. And power given freely never ends well. So here's the truth. No one dares say, you're supposed to be afraid. Afraid of loving the wrong person too long. Afraid of betraying your values for validation. Afraid of becoming a man who gives so much. He forgets what it feels like to receive. That fear, that's not weakness, it's instinct. And ignoring it, that's the real danger. Because what good is being held at night if you have to kill your dignity to be there? What good is being loved if that love only survives by silencing your spine? Real love, powerful love, isn't fearless. It's watchful. It's structured. It's earned. It protects as much as it gives. So if they call you cold for setting standards, if they call you distant for enforcing your worth, if they call you hard to love because you won't kneel, let them. You're not here to be worshipped. You're not here to prove how soft you can be. You're here to build something unshakable. Not just connection, sovereignty. Not just romance, respect. And if that means you walk alone for a while, then walk like a king. Because Machiavelli would have whispered this in your ear. Is the throne you're building in her heart worth the crown you're burning on your own head? So no, you don't need to love fearlessly. You need to love wisely, with caution, with clarity. You need to be the kind of man who says, I will give you my heart, but I will never give you the power to break it without consequence. That's not cold. That's calculated. And in a world that feeds off soft men, calculation is survival. This is it. The final breath of the man you used to be. The one who led with emotion, who tried to be liked, who thought goodness was enough. He's gone, because he was never leading. He was leaking. Leaking patience, leaking forgiveness, leaking identity in exchange for approval. And no one came to save him. No one said, you're giving too much. You're breaking behind that smile. You're fading. No, they clapped. They called him strong, empathetic, reliable. They used him and called it love. And he kept showing up until there was nothing left to show. But you are not that man anymore. Because now you understand something Machiavelli knew centuries ago. Power doesn't belong to the kindest man in the room. It belongs to the most calculated one. The man who knows exactly what he allows, exactly when he withdraws, exactly where he draws the line, and never needs to explain why. That's authority. And this is the shift. You stop justifying your standards. You stop apologizing for your silence. You stop defending your distance. You don't yell. You disappear. Not out of pettiness, but out of principle. Because the man who moves in silence doesn't just inspire curiosity. He commands fear. Now, when someone crosses your line, you don't negotiate. You don't beg. You let your absence teach the lesson your words never could. When they say, why are you acting different? You say, I've recalibrated. And that's it. No over-explaining. No defending. No guilt. Because authority doesn't explain. It acts. And this is your final transition. From the man who sought to be heard, to the man who's heard without speaking. From the man who reacted emotionally to the man who responds with strategy. From the man who overgave to the man who now watches, who earns access, and who gets filtered out. Every boundary you draw from here on is not an invitation to debate. It is a threshold. Those who belong will rise to meet it. The rest will fall away, and you will not chase. Because chasing is what emotional men do. You are no longer emotional. You are exact. You don't define yourself by how much you endure. You define yourself by what you no longer tolerate. You don't demand apologies. You demand alignment. You don't plead for understanding. You reward growth, and your presence. It becomes expensive. Your care. Conditional. Not out of cruelty. Out of value. Because what is sacred must be guarded, or it will be gutted. Machiavelli didn't preach cruelty. He preached restraint, precision, strategic silence. He didn't burn bridges. He watched who was willing to swim across the moat when the gate didn't open. Now, You build your moat. You raise your standards. You rebuild the kingdom of your peace. With brick, not hope. With boundaries, not blind trust. And when they say, "You've changed," you smile. Because that was always the point. You're no longer the man who gave everything away just to be chosen. You are the man who finally chose himself. And from here on out, every move you make is no longer a reaction. It is a signal. You have arrived, and you will not be ignored. So now you know, it was never love. It was obedience. It was never peace. It was your silence, repackaged as virtue. It was never about respect. It was about how much of yourself you were willing to sacrifice just to be allowed in the room. You gave everything, your presence, your forgiveness, your fire, and in return, they misunderstood you. They took you for granted. They called you safe because you made them feel powerful. But the man they once knew, the one who bled quietly, who smiled through betrayal, who stood at the door, waiting to be chosen, he's gone, and he's not coming back. Because this version of you doesn't beg to be seen. He commands attention. This version doesn't love to prove his worth. He loves with structure, with standards, with sovereignty. This version doesn't ask for peace. He builds it, guards it, and burns the bridge of anyone who confuses kindness with weakness. So don't explain. Don't justify. Don't look back. Let them say you've changed. Because they never loved the real you. They loved the version who kept breaking so they could stay comfortable. And now that version is dead. What stands in his place is a man of presence, of boundaries, of command. If something inside you shifted today, if you felt your ribs crack open and your fire return, don't ignore it. That wasn't just a video. That was your resurrection. So press like not for me. For you, as a declaration, a funeral for the old you. A signal to yourself that you're no longer available to be disrespected. And if you're ready to stay on this path, hit subscribe. Not because you need another video, but because you're building a life where every word you hear reminds you of the man you were born to become. This isn't motivation. It's memory. This isn't inspiration. It's a warning. You were not born to be loved. You were born to master how love is given. So say it with me. I am no longer the one who waits. I am the one who sets the terms. You either become cold-blooded, disciplined, calm, untouchable, or you keep bleeding, smiling through it, and calling it love. The choice is yours. But if you're still here, I already know what you've chosen. Welcome back. Welcome forward. Your command has begun. And if you've supported us with a super thanks, thank you for standing with this movement. It matters.